The dative case is a grammatical case generally used to indicate the noun to which something is given, as in Maria gave Jacob a drink. Here, Jacob is an indirect dative. In general, the dative marks the indirect object of a verb, although in some instances, the dative is used for the direct object of a verb pertaining directly to an act of giving something. This may be a tangible object, or an intangible abstraction. Sometimes the dative has functions unrelated to giving. In Scottish Gaelic and Irish, the term dative case is used in traditional grammars to refer to the prepositional case marking of nouns following simple prepositions and the definite article. In Georgian, the dative case also marks the subject of the sentence with some verbs and some tenses. This is called the dative construction. The dative was common among early Indo-European languages and has survived to the present in the Balto-Slavic branch and the Germanic branch, among others. It also exists in similar forms in several non-Indo-European languages, such as the Uralic family of languages. In some languages, the dative case has assimilated the functions of other now extinct cases. In ancient Greek, the dative has the functions of the Proto-Indo-European locative and instrumental as well as those of the original dative. Under the influence of English, which uses the preposition to for both indirect objects and directions of movement, the term dative has sometimes been used to describe cases that in other languages would more appropriately be called lative. Etymology. Dative comes from a Latin casus dativis, a translation of Greek delta omicron tau iota kappa pi tau sigma iota of sigma, dodictosis, from its use with the verb didonai, to give. Dionysius Thrax in his Art of Grammar also refers to it as epistaltic, for sending, for the verb episteo, send to, a word from the same root as epistle. English. The Old English language, current until approximately sometime after the time of the Norman conquest in 1066, had a dative case. However, the English case system gradually fell into disuse during the Middle English period, when in pronouns, the accusative and dative merged into a single oblique case that was also used for all prepositions. This conflation of case in Middle and Modern English has led most modern grammarians to discard the accusative and dative labels as obsolete, often using the term objective for oblique set expressions. While the dative case is no longer very common in modern English usage, it survives in a few set expressions. One good example is the word methinks, with the meaning it seems to me. It survives in this fixed form from the days of Old English, in which it was constructed as plus me plus thinks. The dative case also survives, albeit rarely, in the ethnic dative, used to express one's interest in a matter. This only occurs with pronouns. For instance, in the phrase, "Cry me a river," me is used not only to express the recipient of the action, but the form is used sarcastically in American English to express the speaker's disinterest in the action. Relic pronouns. The pronoun whom is a remnant of the dative case in English, descending from the Old English dative pronoun hwam, though whom also absorbed the functions of the Old English accusative pronoun who won. It is also cognate to the word wem in German. The OED defines all classical uses of the word whom in situations where the indirect object is not known, in effect, indicating the anonymity of the indirect object. Likewise, some of the object forms of personal pronouns are remnants of Old English datives. For example, him goes back to the Old English dative him, and her goes back to the dative her. These pronouns are not proper datives anymore in modern English because they are also used for functions of the accusative. Modern English. A grammatical object is an object of something, either an object of a preposition or an object of a verb. Objects of verbs can be either direct or indirect, while objects of prepositions are neither direct nor indirect. The indirect object of the verb is expressed between the verb and the direct object of the verb. He gave me a book, or he wrote me a poem. Note that an indirect object can often be rewarded with a prepositional phrase using to or for, but is no longer an indirect object. For example, he gave a book to me, and he wrote a poem for me, describe the same situations as the examples above, but are now adverbial prepositional phrases. It should be no surprise and cause no confusion that two obviously different grammatical structures can describe the same situation. However, referring to these prepositional objects mistakenly as indirect objects is a common, if not endemic, error, especially among foreign language textbooks and teachers. Spanish. Due to syntactic flexibility in Spanish, the indirect object of the verb is marked with the preposition a, although is not considered the object of the preposition, a potentially confusing optical illusion. All of these sentences are correct iterations of John told Mary the truth. Juan dijo a Maria la verdad. Juan dijo la verdad a Maria. Th flexible word order and the object marker a can easily lead English speakers to think this reflects the same structure as the prepositional object in English. Juan told the truth to Maria, but it does not. Shifting the subject somewhere behind the verb demonstrates why the indirect object is marked in Spanish, distinguishing it from the subject. Dijo la verdad Juan a Maria. Dijo la verdad a Maria Juan. In Spanish, indirect object pronouns immediately precede the verb. Juan dijo la verdad. La dijo Juan la verdad. La dijo la verdad Juan. Indirect object pronouns can also be attached to the infinitive and the gerund. Diciendo la verdad. Dice la verdad. If the indirect object appears somewhere before the verb, it is usual, bordering on obligatory, to also include the indirect object pronoun. I Maria Juan dijo la verdad. I Maria la dijo la verdad Juan. It is very common, although by no means obligatory, to use the indirect object pronoun redundantly when the indirect object appears somewhere after the verb. Juan dijo la verdad a Maria. Spanish uses the indirect object to express many ideas that have to be expressed in English using other structures. Juan vio la cara a Maria. Idea expressed: Juan saw Maria's face. Juan limpió la cocina a Maria. Idea expressed: Juan cleaned the kitchen for Maria. Indirect objects are often associated to express actions of giving, but in Spanish they are also used in actions of taking. Juan robó a Maria el dinero. Idea expressed: Juan stole the money from Maria. Juan quitó a Maria el dinero. Idea expressed: Juan took the money from Maria. Each indirect object pronoun in Spanish also has an optional emphatic clarifying tag. For example, Juan dijo la verdad. While the primary indirect object pronoun completes the verb, its tag cannot. Juan dijo la verdad * ella. Ungrammatical. However, the primary indirect object pronoun cannot be used without the verb, as in this question. Answer exchange a quien. * la. Ungrammatical. In this case, the indirect object tag is used a quien. A ella. Spanish indirect objects are also used with a small group of very common verbs, are often referred to as psych verbs. Because these ideas are expressed with direct objects in English, they often cause confusion for English speakers. La película gustó, interesó, molesto a Maria. idea expressed, the movie pleased, interested, bothered Maria. In English, most indirect objects can be reworded as prepositional objects, however this is rare in Spanish, but not impossible. Indirect object: Juan compró un regalo a Maria. Juan bought Maria a gift, reworded as prepositional object: Juan compró un regalo para Maria. Juan bought a gift for Maria. German. In general, the dative is used to mark the indirect object of a German sentence. For example, ich schickte dem Mann das Buch. Masculine: Ich gab der Frau den Stift zurück. Feminine: Ich überreiche dem Kind ein Geschenk. Neuter. In English, the first sentence may be rendered, I sent the man the book. The indirect object here is marked by standing in front of the direct object. The normal word order in German is also to put the dative in front of the accusative. However, since the German dative is marked in form, it can also be put after the accusative. Ich schickte das Buch dem Mann. The after man and kind signifies a now largely archaic e ending for certain nouns in the dative. It survives today almost exclusively in set phrases such as zu Haus, im Zug, and am Tage, as well as in occasional usage in formal prose, poetry, and songs. Some masculine nouns, referred to as weak nouns or n nouns, take an n or n in the dative singular and plural. Many are masculine nouns ending in e in the nominative, although not all such nouns follow this rule. Many also, whether or not they fall into the former category, refer to people, animals, professions, or titles. Exceptions to this include the aforementioned Herzen name, as well as Buchstabe, Frieda, Obelisk, planet, and others. Certain German prepositions require the dative os, außer, bei, and gegen, mit, nach, seit, von, zu, and gegenüber. Other prepositions may be used with dative or accusative. Das Buch liegt auf dem Tisch, but it liegt das Buch auf den Tisch. In addition, the four prepositions wegen, trotz, statt and waren, which require the genitive in modern formal language, are most commonly used with the dative in colloquial German. For example, because of the weather is expressed as wegen dem Wetter instead of the formally correct wegen des Wetters. Other prepositions requiring the genitive in formal language are combined with von in colloquial style, e.g., außerhalb vom Garten instead of außerhalb des Gartens. Note that the concept of an indirect object may be rendered by a prepositional phrase. In this case, the noun's or pronounced case is determined by the preposition, not by its function in the sentence. Consider this sentence: Ich sandte das Buch zum Verleger. I sent the book to the editor. Single quote. Here, the subject, ich, is in the nominative case, the direct object, das Buch, is in the accusative case, and zum Verleger is in the dative case. Since zu always requires the dative. However, ich habe das Buch an meinen Freund weitergegeben. I forwarded the book to my friend. In this sentence, Freund is the indirect object, but, because it follows an, the accusative is required, not the dative. All of the articles change in the dative case. Some German verbs require the dative for their direct objects. Common examples include folgen, helfen, and antworten. In each case, the direct object of the verb is rendered in dative. For example, mein Freund helfen mir. These verbs cannot be used in normal passive constructions, because German allows these only for verbs with accusative objects. It is therefore ungrammatical to say, *, ich werde geholfen. I am helped. Instead, a special construction, called impersonal passive, must be used. Mir wird geholfen, literally, to me is helped. A colloquial and rarely used way to form the passive voice for dative verbs is the following. Ich kriege geholfen or ich bekomme geholfen, literally I get helped. The use of the verb to get here reminds us that the dative case has something to do with giving and receiving. In German, help is not something you perform on somebody, but rather something you offer them. The dative case is also used with reflexive verbs when specifying what part of the self the verb is being done to. Ich wasche mich. Accusative. Ich wasche mir die Hand. Dative. Cf. the respective accord in French. Les enfants sont lavés versus les enfants sont lavés les mains. German can use two datives to make sentences like sei mir meinem Sohn gnädig. For my sake, have mercy on my son. Literally, be to meet my son merciful. The first dative mir expresses the speaker's commiseration. The second dative meinem Sohn names the actual object of the plea. Mercy is to be given to the son for or on behalf of his mother, father. Adjective endings also change in the dative case. There are three possible inflection possibilities depending on what precedes the adjective. They most commonly use weak inflection when preceded by a definite article, mixed inflection after an indefinite article, and strong inflection when a quantity is indicated. Latin. Except the main case, there are several other kinds. Dativus finalis, e.g., non scolae sed vitae, we learn for life, not for school. Auxilio vocare, to call for help. Venio auxilio, I'm coming for help. Accipio dono, I receive this as a gift. Or puellae ornamento est, this serves for the girl's decoration. Dativus commodi, which means action for somebody, e.g., gressus agros coler, to till fields. For Greeks, combination of dativus commodi and finalis, tibi laetitia, to you for joy. Dativus possessivus, which means possession, e.g., angelus ali sunt, literally, to the angels are wings. This is typically found with a copula and translated as the angels have wings. Dativus ethicus indicates that the person in the dative is or should be especially concerned about the action, e.g., quid mihi celsus agit, what is Celsus doing? Or sui produst, whose interest does this serve? Dativus auctoris, meaning, in the eyes of, e.g., verbonus mihi vidita, the man seems good to me. The dative is also used to express agency with the gerund of a future passive participle that, along with the verb to be, expresses obligation and necessity of the action being performed on the noun with which it agrees, e.g., haec nobis agenda sunt, these things must be done by use. Greek. Ancient. In addition to its main function as the dativus, the dative case has other functions in classical Greek. Dativus finalis. The dativus finalis, or the dative of purpose, is when the dative is used to denote the purpose of a certain action. For example, tau beta alpha sigma iota lambda epsilon mu alpha I omicron mu alpha iota. I fight for the king. Theta nu sigma kappa omega tau tau iota mu. I die for honor. Dativus commodi. The dativus commodi saving commodi, or the dative of benefit, is the dative that expresses the advantage or disadvantage of something for someone. For example, for the benefit of pi sigma nu rho alpha tau pi omicron nu epsilon. Every man toils for himself. For the harm or disadvantage of delta epsilon mu epsilon rho alpha tau omicron sigma lambda lambda eta sigma iota mu epsilon gamma alpha lambda omega nu kappa alpha kappa nu rho epsilon iota. This day will be the beginning of great sorrows for the Greeks. Dativus possessivus. The dativus possessivus, or the dative of possession, is the dative used to denote the possessor of a certain object or objects. For example, lambda lambda omicron iota sigma mu nu gamma rho chi rho eta mu alpha sigma tau iota pi omicron lambda lambda kappa alpha pi omicron iota mu nu delta xi epsilon mu alpha chi omicron iota gamma alpha theta omicron iota. For others have a lot of money and ships and horses, but we have good allies. Dativis ethicus. The dativis ethicus, or the ethica polite dative, is when the dative is used to signify that the person or thing spoken of is regarded with interest by someone. This dative is mostly, if not exclusively, used in pronouns. As such, it is also called the dative of pronouns. For example, tau omicron epsilon tau pi alpha nu epsilon mu omicron iota pi rho omicron sigma epsilon chi epsilon tau nu omicron nu. Pay close attention to this, I beg you. Mu tau epsilon rho sigma kappa alpha lambda omicron sigma mu omicron iota pi alpha pi omicron sigma. Oh, mother, how handsome grandpa is. Dativis auctoris. The dativis auctoris, or the dative of agent, is the dative used to denote the doer of an action. Note, however, that in classical Greek, the agent is usually in the genitive after pi omicron. The agent is in the dative only with the perfect and pluperfect passive, and after the verbal adjective in tau epsilon omicron sigma. For example, pi omicron lambda lambda alpha theta epsilon rho alpha pi epsilon alpha iota tau omicron sigma alpha tau rho omicron sigma epsilon rho eta nu tau alpha iota. Many cures have been discovered by doctors. Dativus instrumenti. The dativus instrumenti, or the dative of instrument, is when the dative is used to denote an instrument or means of a certain action. For example, mu epsilon kappa tau epsilon iota nu epsilon iota delta omicron lambda. He kills me with a bait. Dativis modi. The dativis modi, or the dative of manner, is the dative used to describe the manner way by which something happened. For example, nu omicron sigma sigma tau epsilon rho omicron nu pi omicron theta alpha nu omicron nu tau alpha, having died of a disease. Dativus mensurae. The dativus mensurae, or the dative of measurement, is the dative used to denote the measurement of difference. For example, tau kappa epsilon phi alpha lambda mu epsilon iota zeta omicron nu alpha, taller by head, mu alpha kappa rho iota sigma tau omicron sigma. By far the best. The articles in the Greek dative are nouns as well as adjectives receive suffixes. These vary according to the declension. The dative case, strictly speaking, no longer exists in modern Greek, except in fossilized expressions like delta omicron xi alpha tau omega theta epsilon omega or epsilon nu tau alpha xi epsilon iota. Otherwise, most of the functions of the dative have been subsumed in the accusative. Slavic languages. In Russian, the dative case is used for indicating the indirect object of an action. In the instance where a person is the goal of motion, dative is used instead of accusative to indicate motion toward. This is usually achieved with the preposition kappa plus destination in dative case, meaning to the doctor. Dative is also the necessary case taken by certain prepositions when expressing certain ideas. For instance, when the preposition is used to mean along, its object is always in dative case, as in meaning along the sides. Other Slavic languages apply the dative case more or less the same way as does Russian. Some languages may use the dative in other ways. The following examples are from Polish. After certain verbs, in certain expressions, Nilo jz. She dreamt that. Dative is commodi to indicate action for somebody.
When something is taken away or something occurs to someone. Some other kinds of dative uses found in the Serbo-Croatian language are dativus finalis, dativus commodi, incommodi, dativus possessivus, dativus ethicus, and dativus auctoris. Unusual in other Indo-European branches but common among Slavic languages. Endings of nouns and adjectives are different based on grammatical function. Other factors are gender and number. In some cases, the ending may not be obvious, even when those three factors are considered. For example, in Polish, syn and ojciech are both masculine singular nouns, yet appear as syn synowy and ojciech ojcu in the dative. Baltic languages. Both Lithuanian and Latvian have a distinct dative case in the system of nominal declensions. Lithuanian nouns preserve Indo-European inflections in the dative case fairly well. Vaikas and GT, SG. Vaikui place Vaikams, Ranka and GT, SG. Rankai place Rankams, Viltis and GT, SG. Vilchai place Viltams, Sunus and GT, SG. Sunui place Sunams, Vanduo and GT, SG. The Vandanui place the Vandenums. Adjectives in the dative case receive pronominal endings, Tas Geris Vicus and GT, SG. Tam Geram Vicui place Teams Geriams Vacams. The dative case in Latvian underwent further simplifications. The original masculine endings of both nouns and adjectives have been replaced with pronominal inflections, tas vers and gt, sg. Tam viram place tm viriem. Also, the final s in all dative forms has been dropped. The only exception is personal pronouns in the plural mums, jums. Note that in colloquial Lithuanian the final s in the dative is often omitted as well. Time geriam vacam. In both Latvian and Lithuanian, the main function of the dative case is to render the indirect object in a sentence. As duo du viru eknygas do virum grammata. I am giving a book to the man. The dative case can also be used with gerundives to indicate an action preceding a simultaneous with the main action in a sentence. Jam ahust visiat sister Joe. When he walked in, everybody stood up. Lit. To him having walked in, all stood up. Jai myagant visid erbo. While she slept, everybody was working. Lit. To her sleeping, all were working. In modern Standard Lithuanian, dative case is not required by prepositions, although in many dialects it is done frequently. Iki siidino, iki sios dinos, up until this day. In Latvian, the dative case is taken by several prepositions in the singular and all prepositions in the plural. Sg. Bez teva tilde place bez jums, sg. Parsi elu tilde place parsiliem. Armenian. In modern Eastern Armenian, the dative is attained by adding any article to the genitive. Dog equals gen and gt, with no articles. Dat and gt, or with definite articles dat and gt, with indefinite article dat and gt, with first-person possessive article. Dat and gt, with second-person possessive article. There is a general tendency to view as the standard dative suffix, but only because that is its most productive form. The suffix as a dative mark is nothing but the standard, most common, genitive suffix accompanied by the definite article, but the dative case encompasses indefinite objects as well, which will not be marked by definite dat and gt. Indefinite dat and gt. The main function of the dative marking in Armenian is to indicate the receiving end of an action, more commonly the indirect object, which in English is preceded by the preposition to. In the use of giving, verbs like give, donate, offer, deliver, sell, bring. The dative marks the recipient, with communicative verbs like tell, say, advise, explain, ask, answer.
The dative marks the listener. Other verbs whose indirect objects are marked by the dative case in Armenian are show, reach, look, approach, ... Eastern Armenian also uses the dative case to mark the time of an event, in the same way English uses the preposition at, as in meet me at 9 o'clock. Sanskrit, the dative case is known as the fourth case in the usual procedure in the declension of nouns. Its use is mainly for the indirect object, as Sanskrit has 7 other cases including an instrumental. The term dative is grammatically similar to the Sanskrit word datta. Datta means gift or the act of giving. Non-Indo-European languages, Hungarian as with many other languages, the dative case is used in Hungarian to show the indirect object of a verb. For example, Daniel nagadtamized konive. It has 2 suffixes nak and nek. The correct is selected by vowel harmony. The personal dative pronouns follow the nek version, nekem, nikt, etc. This case is also used to express a for in certain circumstances, such as, I bought a gift for mother. In possessive constructions the nek endings are also used, but this is not the dative form. Finish does not have a separate dative case. However, the allative case can fulfill essentially the same role as dative, beyond its primary meaning of directional movement. For example, il adjectivat kaiki rafanza coil, tsez. In the Northeast Caucasian languages, such as tsez, the dative also takes the functions of the lative case in marking the direction of an action. By some linguists, they are still regarded as 2 separate cases in those languages, although the suffixes are exactly the same for both cases. Other linguists list them separately only for the purpose of separating syntactic cases from locative cases. An example with the ditransitive verb show is given below. The dative lative is also used to indicate possession, as in the example below, because there is no such verb as to have, as in the examples above. The dative lative case usually occurs in combination with another suffix as postlative case. This should not be regarded as a separate case. However, as many of the locative cases in tsez are constructed analytically, hence they are, in fact, a combination of 2 case suffixes. See tsez language #locative case suffixes for further details. Verbs of perception or emotion also require the logical subject to stand in the dative lative case. Note that in this example the pure dative lative without its post suffix is used.